Thank you, Alaska Curley, and I want to thank Senator Coffey and my colleagues on this side of the House for putting forward this issue of our national and local response to the incredibly harsh and unusual conditions that we saw in this country over the Christmas period and in the first few weeks of January of this year. I want to start by acknowledging the huge local and personal effort that went into combating the impacts and the most severe effects of the weather crisis. In my own constituency, I know that all outdoor employees, particularly those workers that were responsible for gritting the primary roads, put in a mammoth effort for the length and duration of the crisis. They worked extremely long hours in very, very difficult conditions, and I know that on Christmas Eve in my constituency, a gritting team were still out treating the roads at 2:30 in the morning. And I think we need to commend the efforts, and we need to recognise the efforts of public employees from this House, because that's not always the case. But certainly I have nothing but praise for the work and the effort that was put in, certainly by my own local authority. And rather than going down the route of political blame on this, I think it would be very helpful if we could have a constructive debate and conversation about what went wrong, about what worked, because in some parts of the country I think performed better than others. I think all parts of the country showed tremendous effort, but I think in some parts perhaps the results of those efforts were greater than in others. And I think a lot of the problems went beyond the control of the authorities, and I think we can learn about how a more effective response can help the situation in the future. I know that there's a significant aftermath of the weather crisis, and we see that, as mentioned by Senator Glynn, in terms of the road conditions, which are absolutely appalling on the non-national roads. I think that something has to be done. It's a situation that hopefully we won't see again in most of our lifetimes, but we do need to, and I think the Minister needs to react to the conditions of our roads at the moment, because they are severely dangerous, and they're also having an impact on the economic life of the country and on motorists. I know, and I can see, and I challenge anybody in this House to go out and look at the wheels and the tyres of cars outside the capital, and they'll see that many people, due to no fault of their own, it's a very, very tight financial month of January, but many people are driving on tyres that perhaps now are slightly unsafe because they've hit one too many potholes. So I think there is an impact that needs to be recognised by the House, and the only way that we can deal with this impact is by putting more money into our local authorities to allow them to improve and to refurbish the road network across the country. But I want to speak in very specific terms about the total communications failure that we did say, and I think that defined the weather crisis. I'll start by reading from the Department of the Environment's publication on coordination around major emergencies in Ireland, and it says, "The framework is designed primarily to provide for the protection, support and welfare of the public in times of emergency. Effective arrangements to ensure public safety in times of emergency also have the benefit of helping to safeguard the environment, the economy, infrastructure and property. And the framework for major emergencies aims to ensure we are able to respond to emergencies at the national, regional and local level, and to make sure that the essential services keep operating." On that basis, I think it's important to recognise that we must conclude that the framework failed in many of its objectives. Thousands of people across the country, thousands in my own constituency, were affected for days. Countless older people were left trapped in their homes, unable to get out for the duration of the crisis. Many people were unable to get buses to work. Many people were unable to use their cars to get to work for weeks on end. The local economy, certainly in some parts of East Meath, ceased to operate for the length of this crisis. There were many accidents involving motorists and pedestrians over the 3 weeks. Now, nobody is saying that the weather that we experienced was in any way typical of conditions in Ireland. What was entirely typical, however, was the absolute failure from government in terms of communicating a coordinated national response. That just did not happen. It's without doubt entirely necessary that any emergency response framework includes multiple layers of government. A top-down action strategy would be impossible to implement, given that much of the necessary work happens at local level. However, it must be understood that alleviation and action plan implementation can and should be distinct from the communications strategy that should logically surround an emergency response framework. And while alleviation is complex and involves a multi-agency response, emergency communications should be clear, cohesive, and there should be one voice from authority. Instead, the public got silence for weeks, followed by confused messages from government, defensive comments and often contradictory messages from the authorities. Now, this is not a difficult concept to grasp, yet the government utterly failed to communicate any sense that there was a genuine coordinated response or that the situation was being managed on behalf of the public. Can I ask the Minister if there exists a communication strategy for emergency situations? That wasn't clear. Similarly, I'd like you to clarify to the House that a review of emergency communications will be carried out in the light of the failures over Christmas. I want to make a few concrete, inexpensive and reasonably easily implementable suggestions. The following quote appears on the website www.emergencyplanning.ie, and it says, "For current information on severe weather issues, please contact your local authority." You may access your local authority's website through the links button on this page. That's the sum total in terms of information that appeared on the centralised emergency response website for the state. Passing the buck is not communicating. It creates confusion, a lack of cohesion and fragmented emergency responses. And I think that we need to look at this, and we need to make sure that we put in a more detailed, coordinated response. We could do it by improving the amount of information that we have on social network sites like Facebook and Twitter that could be activated in terms of emergencies to provide real-time and immediate updates in terms of events and in terms of what to do. Social media is an invaluable tool for connecting with people in a time of crisis. Following the cancellation of services due to the bad weather, Eurostar, which operates between London and Paris and Brussels, they were severely criticised for their breakdown in any sort of communications with the members of the public and with their passengers. They're currently reviewing entirely their communication strategies in light of these failures, and I strongly suggest that the government does likewise. People, even opposition politicians, understand that certain events are totally outside the control of the government and present the apparatus of the state with very serious managerial and reactive challenges. There is, however, absolutely no excuse for the farcical level of communications and run-for-cover mentality that characterised the response to the weather crisis. One very simple example relates to the subsequent problems in terms of water supply. On several message boards and blogs, ill-informed but well-meaning people advised others to leave the main household tap on a slow drip to avoid freezing pipes. So advice was quite often confused, advice was often given out incorrectly. The government and the Minister did allow a vacuum to develop around the weather crisis. That vacuum was filled by anger, by poor advice and by a damaging perception that nobody was managing the crisis. In conclusion, Minister, I've spoken in very specific terms today about how this kind of situation might be better managed in the future. I'd be very interested to hear your views on how communication, coordination and reassurance can be implemented more effectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.